This is Jed Disler, and welcome to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. A listener recently wrote me and asked if I possibly could recommend recordings for each of the Debussy Preludes in books 1 and 2, and to do so by recommending one pianist only for each prelude and not to repeat a pianist over the course of the 24 preludes. And by my undertaking this endeavor, I know I'm going to get a lot of backlash, of course. Hey, Jed, how come you chose Walter Gieseking for this prelude when everyone knows that Liberace made the best recording of that particular prelude? And so on and so forth. So let's get it straight right at the start that I am not picking necessarily the best recordings for each of these preludes, but rather that I'm naming special favorites. And also bear in mind that within this list of 24 pianists, there should not be any weak links, at least I don't think so. These are all simply excellent recorded versions for each of the 24 Debussy Preludes. And I've done a rather heroic job of assembling links to access each and every one of these recordings. But for this episode, I'm only going to deal with the preludes in Book 1, the 12 pieces in Book 1, and we will continue with Book 2 fairly soon. I figure that this way you will have time to absorb my recommendations and check them out if you so desire. And anyway, 12 pieces, that's quite a lot anyway. For prelude number 1, Danseuse des Delphes, the Dances of the Delphs, I've posted a link to a recording by the pianist Catherine Kotsky. She is a prominent Debussy scholar, but more importantly, she is a scholar who puts her money where her mouth is, and she has an excellent recording of all 24 preludes available on the Centaur label. And the way she plays the first prelude, I really love the performance because it has a relaxed animation and it has subtle gradations of touch and dynamics, and it's really quite lovely. Prelude number 2, Voile. Am I pronouncing that right? V-O-I-L-E-S. Well, in English, it means sails, like on a sailboat. For this prelude, I've actually chosen a period instrument performance, and this is one by the pianist Philippe Cassard. And it was first released on the French Alvidis label in the early 1990s, and then Decca picked it up and reissued this whole Debussy cycle. And he uses a very well-preserved Bechstein piano from 1898, and it has a warm sonority and very clear registral differentiation. And the high notes have a slightly metallic, yet rather gentle tonal residue. And I think that this kind of tonal patina really adds a lot to the performances because the piece is relatively static harmonically in its use of the whole tone scale. So having an instrument with this kind of timbral distinction between registers, I think really helps the music. And of course, the performance itself is really, really well done. Prelude number 3, Le Vent dans les Plaines. Did I pronounce that right? P-L-A-I-N-E. I better take some French lessons. I studied French in high school, and I really enjoyed it, except the final year I took the language, I had a horrible teacher, and it kind of got me off of studying French any further. Anyway, the title of this prelude is The Wind in the Plain. And for this piece, I always find myself going back to the old Alfred Cortot recordings of this prelude because he really keeps Debussy's tempo directive of animé very much alive throughout the piece, yet he does so without ever sounding rushed. And the shifts of color with each unexpected shift in harmony still thrill me as a listener. And those downward double note figurations, Cortot plays these in tempo without any technical compromise in his two earliest recordings of this prelude. One of them being a standalone 1928 recording, which is probably the most incisive of the three that we have. And his remake, that's part of the 1931 complete cycle of the 12 Preludes, Book 1. Maybe it's just a tad less technically solid, though it's really, really excellent still. And it's much better recorded. There's more of a dynamic range, and you really get more of Cortot's color. When Cortot remade Book 1 in 1949, he was somewhat past his prime. And he still played this prelude quite well, but the tempo in this recording, the 1949 version, is a little bit slower, and those chromatic figurations, those descending two-note chords I talked about, are not quite so smoothly executed as they were 2 decades earlier. Prelude number 4 is called Les sons et les parfums tournant dans l'air du soir. God, that's a mouthful of my bad French. The sounds and fragrances swirl through the evening air. This is not a prelude that gets talked about so often, but I think it's a remarkable piece, actually. And its basic rhythm implies a saraband without ever really being a saraband. And it has a kind of built-in rubato that makes it really unnecessary to use lots of imposed rubato. So, in other words, if you play this music straight, it basically interprets itself. I love the deliberation and the concentration and the sensitivity in a performance by Catherine Collard, who recorded both books of preludes for RCA Victor in 1993. And this whole cycle is really lovely and quite cultivated, and it should be restored to the catalog. It first came out on RCA, and then it was reissued by Newton Classics on CD. Remember this label? They licensed a lot of stuff from Philips and RCA and Decca. I think you can get the Catherine Collard cycle still as a download in different places. You should definitely check that out online. But I did put in a link in the episode comments. Prelude number 5, Les Collines d'Anacapri, the hills of Anacapri. You know, when I first was studying to play this piece when I was a student, I somehow thought the word colline meant young girls or young maidens, like the maidens of Anacapri. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe it was the fast dancing music and the quick changes of mood throughout the piece. One of my very favorite performances is that of the Hungarian pianist Livia Rev, and her performance has great contrasts and mood and texture and really hard-hitting accents that are still not too aggressive, fortunately, and she really gets this music's character. However, the $64,000 question, which of Livia Rev's 2 recordings of this prelude do I prefer? There's one from 1990 on Hyperion, which is very easily accessible. You can get that by streaming or downloading. Her earlier 1980 recording on the Saga Classics label, however, is much harder to source. That's the one I slightly prefer, but the Hyperion one is perfectly fine, and I've posted a link to that. But if you do happen to find the Saga recording, grab it. Okay, Prelude number 6, Des pas sur la neige, Footprints in the Snow. Gosh, this is such a miraculous piece. I just love the way that Debussy uses so few notes to create such a fragile and such a delicate and such a desolate atmosphere. And because of this, every note in every phrase is totally exposed. And, if you're a pianist, one false move or one accent that's out of place or one phrase that's not well considered, and basically it'll sound like sight reading. You really have to work hard to interpret this piece well. But there is a pianist who projects every sound with unswerving purpose and specificity and tonal beauty beyond belief, and with a sense of controlled rapture. That's the pianist Ivan Moravec. Now, he did not record all of the Book 1 preludes, but what he does with number 6 is quite special. Now, we go the opposite route, pianistically speaking, with number 7, What the West Wind Has Seen. You notice that I'm not trying to say the French title? Smart. This is a piece all about outright virtuosity. Well, not completely, but outright virtuosity is a big component of it. In some ways, it's kind of Lisztian. Anyway, Debussy is very careful with how he deploys the dynamics. And the trick for pianists is to not get too loud too soon and not to anticipate or telegraph the climaxes or the sudden crescendos. And for these reasons, I like a performance by Pascal Roger that comes from his early 1970s cycle of the Preludes Book 1 that he recorded for Decca. And he really adheres to Debussy's dynamic and expressive markings, but he still conveys a real sense of nervous energy, and he has a whiplash kind of virtuosity that really does underline the music's occasional bows to the Franz Liszt tradition. Number 8, The Girl with the Flaxen Hair. Now, this is one of Debussy's greatest hits, and you just want to play this piece simply. It doesn't need probing. It doesn't need a fake kind of depth that's not there. You don't have to play it with anguish. And I've heard some performances of this piece that are positively dirge-like, as if that girl with the flaxen hair is on her deathbed. However, by contrast, and very happily so, Jean-Yves Thibaudet plays this piece with a songful fluidity and just enough nuance, no more than necessary. His performance has just the right ebb and flow to it, and it's beautifully recorded as well. Number 9, Prelude number 9, La Serenade Interrompue. God, did I say that? I didn't say it quite so well in French. The Interrupted Serenade. And the title of this piece, I think, truly depicts what the music is about. And I think it always helps when a pianist understands the flamenco-like character of the repeated notes and the harmony. And this is a piece that needs much more lilt than drive. And I think that Nelson Freire does this perfectly in his recording, which is also on Decca. The repeated notes are supple and light, and they have a sense of air in between the notes that you don't normally get in this piece. His tempo feels just right, and those chordal outbursts don't hit you over the head, as they often tend to do in other performances. I think this performance has great character and a wonderful sense of proportion. Number 10, The Sunken Cathedral. And this is another one of Debussy's greatest hits, and so much critical and analytical ink has been spilled over this piece, especially in regard to how Debussy, in his 1913 piano roll recording, plays certain measures twice as fast as they actually are notated. Stephen Osborne, in his recording for Hyperion, for example, follows Debussy's lead, chapter and verse. Now, Claudio Arrau, in his Phillips recording, adheres to the printed score, not to what Debussy does in the piano roll. But whether Arrau does what Debussy intends, the fact is that Arrau creates an atmosphere of profound calm, and as such, he gets very close to the spirit of what Debussy intends, I think, in Arrau's performance. And the sound world that Arrau gets from his piano conveys beauty and definition and fullness of body, no matter how soft he's playing or no matter how disembodied or ghostly the sonorities that he's conjuring up from the piano. This is an interpretation that I think has real depth, and I really love it, so that's why I'm recommending it. Number 11, The Dance of Puck. There are performances of this piece that go way too fast to the point where you have to take amphetamines in order to dance to it. And there also are performances where the main theme just refuses to swing or take wing. And there are performances where the tempos just go all over the place. But one performance where I feel that everything goes just right is a performance by my dear friend Stephen Spooner. Back in 2017, Stephen brought out this 15-disc box set that also included a DVD, where each disc was dedicated to a certain pianist he admired, and the repertoire that he chose was reflected in the dedications. So 8 of these CDs were dedicated to Sviatoslav Richter, and one of the Richter dedication discs included the 24 Debussy Preludes. And here, Stephen Spooner's performance of La Danse de Puck has everything going for it. Just the right internal sense of swing to the main theme. He has beautifully timed transitions and all kinds of tonal shadings. It's just marvelous. And finally, Prelude number 12, Minstrels. This is like a cakewalk or a quasi-ragtime piece, but maybe it's more of an eccentric dance. And again, you need a sense of swing and a sense of comic timing. And a lot of pianists get certain aspects of this piece right, yet they miss the mark in other places. But there's one performance that I think ticks all the right boxes, so to speak, and hits all of the marks, and without resorting to exaggeration and with real expressive economy and a steady basic tempo that's only adjusted with the utmost subtlety. And this is a performance by a pianist, Henriette Faure. Now, you spell her last name like the composer Faure, Faure, but since there is no accent on the final E, as there is in Faure, you pronounce her last name Faure. And this recording, I think it dates from 1961, at least it was released in 1961. It came out on the French Ducretet Thompson label, and I recently saw a secondhand vinyl copy of this selling for something like $1,800, as if anybody's really going to pay that amount of money for any LP. But you can find this recording in download format. And also you can hear the entire Book 1 of Preludes with Henriette Faure on YouTube. So there we have it, all 12 Debussy Preludes Book 1 with a different pianist recommended in each prelude and without repeating a pianist. And I will repeat none of these 12 pianists when we get to recommending performances of Preludes Book 2, when we get to Book 2 on the Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode. My name is Jed Disler, and I look forward to you and I being together next time. Take good care, and please be kind to one another.